The abandoned Rowan estate was settling under the fading light of dusk, its weathered Victorian facade and overgrown lawn swallowed by long shadows. Like hollow eyes, the windows stared vacantly into the distance, a silent testament to the family that once called this place home. Our story begins here, in the quiet town of Blackfield, Massachusetts, where even decades later, the name Rowan still sends shivers down the spines of locals. Welcome to the Ghastly Journal. I'm your host, and today we're delving into one of the most disturbing family histories ever documented, the macabre history of the Rowans. No one has laid eyes on the daughters since 1953. Before we begin, I must warn you, what you're about to hear isn't for the faint of heart. The tale of the Rowan family is more than just another disappearance case. It is a tapestry woven from bizarre occurrences, unsettling rituals, and a darkness that appears to have consumed an entire bloodline. Some of the locals I interviewed for this piece requested anonymity, their voices still trembling at the mere mention of the family name. The Rowan family first made their arrival in Blackfield in 1887. Patriarch Elias Rowan, a wealthy industrialist who had amassed a fortune in textiles, purchased 50 acres of land on the outskirts of town. A sprawling Victorian mansion was constructed by him within 2 years, complete with a central tower that loomed over the surrounding countryside like a watchful sentinel. Rowan's Reach was what the locals called it, though in hushed whispers, some referred to it as the Crow's Nest, a nickname that would later prove eerily prophetic. Elias did not arrive in Blackfield alone. He brought with him his wife, Constance, a woman described in town records as possessing unusual beauty and even more unusual quietude. The couple had 3 children, twin sons, Edward and Edmund, and a daughter, Eleanor. On paper, they appeared to be the quintessential wealthy American family of the late 19th century. But appearances, as we know all too well, can be profoundly deceiving. The first indication that something wasn't quite right with the Rowans emerged in the winter of 1890. A local hunter, venturing deeper into the woods than usual, stumbled upon what he described as a circle of stones arranged with unnatural precision on the Rowan property. A shallow pit filled with what appeared to be animal bones and feathers lay at its center. When questioned by curious townspeople, Elias dismissed it as old Native American grounds he had decided to preserve out of respect. The explanation satisfied most, but not everyone was convinced. Reverend Thomas Blackwood, Blackfield's parish priest at the time, wrote in his private journal, only discovered in 1978 during church renovations, that he held grave concerns about the Rowan family's spiritual well-being. He noted that while they attended Sunday services without fail, Constance would often be seen muttering words during communion that were not prayers. The Rowan children were enrolled in the local school, but they kept to themselves. Teachers noted that Eleanor, in particular, displayed for a child her age an unusual knowledge of herbs and their properties. The twins, Edward and Edmund, were described as identical in appearance but opposite in nature. Edward was outgoing and charming, while Edmund was withdrawn and observed others with an intensity that made both children and adults uncomfortable. As the years passed, the Rowans became fixtures in Blackfield, though they remained somewhat apart from the community. Elias expanded his business interests, opening a textile mill that employed many locals. This economic contribution made the family too important to ostracize, despite the growing sense that something wasn't quite right at Rowan's Reach. In 1907, tragedy struck when Constance Rowan was found dead in the estate's garden. The official cause was listed as heart failure, though rumors persisted that her body had been discovered in strange circumstances, arranged in a position reminiscent of the stone circle found years earlier and surrounded by crow feathers. Within 6 months of his wife's death, Elias remarried. His new bride, Cordelia Winthrop, was a woman 20 years his junior with no known family or connections in the area. Town records show she simply appeared in Blackfield one day, taking a room at the local boarding house just 2 weeks before meeting Elias at a charity function. By this time, the Rowan children were young adults. Eleanor had been sent to a finishing school in Europe and rarely returned home. The twins had joined their father's business, though Edmund seemed to have a more ceremonial role while Edward handled the day-to-day operations. With Cordelia's arrival, the family dynamics shifted once again. Local historian Margaret Simmons, who has spent decades researching the Rowans, shared with me a disturbing pattern she discovered. After Cordelia joined the household, a marked increase occurred in missing persons reports in Blackfield and surrounding towns, mostly young women, usually those without strong family connections. The authorities at the time never made a connection, but when you look at the geographical distribution and timeline of these disappearances, she noted, it's hard not to see a pattern centering around the Rowan estate. In 1912, Elias Rowan died under circumstances that can only be described as bizarre. According to the coroner's report, he was found in his study, seated at his desk as if working. The cause of death was determined to be severe blood loss, yet no blood was found at the scene. More disturbing still, his eyes had been removed with surgical precision. The official explanation was that Elias had enemies from his business dealings, but no suspects were ever identified, and the case was eventually closed. With Elias gone, ownership of the estate and business passed to Edward, the more socially adept of the twins. Edmund continued to live at Rowan's Reach, growing increasingly reclusive, while Cordelia maintained her position as the lady of the house. Eleanor returned from Europe for her father's funeral but left again shortly after, reportedly telling a childhood acquaintance that she couldn't breathe in that house anymore. The years between 1912 and 1930 saw the Rowan business thrive under Edward's guidance, despite the economic challenges of World War I and its aftermath. Edward married in 1920 to a woman named Lillian Barnes from a respectable Boston family. They had 2 children, a son, Elias II, born in 1921, and a daughter, Constance II, named after Edward's mother, born in 1923. Edmund, meanwhile, remained unmarried and was rarely seen in town. Workers at the Rowan mill whispered that he had taken over the tower room and that strange sounds could be heard coming from it at night, chanting in an unknown language and sometimes what sounded like the fluttering of countless wings. Cordelia, now in her 40s, had developed a reputation as an eccentric. She was often seen wandering the grounds at odd hours, collecting plants and speaking to herself. She had also started a tradition of hosting an annual masquerade ball on the winter solstice, an event that, despite its opulence, left guests feeling unsettled. As one attendee from the 1925 ball wrote in a letter now part of the Blackfield Historical Society's collection, the masks worn by the Rowans themselves were not like any I've seen before. Crafted from what appeared to be actual bird skulls and feathers with glass eyes that seemed to follow one around the room. I shan't be accepting their invitation next year. The Great Depression hit Blackfield hard, but the Rowan textile business weathered the storm better than most. This resilience led to rumors that Edward had made deals with unsavory characters or had access to funds that others didn't. The truth, as revealed in business ledgers discovered during a 1980s tax audit, was more mundane but equally troubling. The Rowans had been systematically underpaying their workers and falsifying records to avoid regulation. In 1935, Edmund Rowan disappeared. No formal missing persons report was ever filed. Edward simply informed the local authorities that his brother had gone abroad for his health. However, Edmund's name never appeared on any passenger manifests leaving the country, and no correspondence from him was ever received. When pressed, Edward became agitated and insisted his brother's whereabouts were a private family matter. It was around this time that locals began reporting an increase in crow populations around Blackfield. The birds seemed to congregate particularly densely around Rowan's Reach, sometimes darkening the sky above the estate in such numbers that it resembled dusk in the middle of the day. Wildlife experts brought in from Boston could offer no explanation for this unusual behavior. The 1940s brought World War II and with it a new chapter in the Rowan saga. Elias II, now a young man, enlisted in the army and was deployed to Europe. Constance II, who had grown into a reserved young woman very much in the mold of her grandmother and namesake, remained at Rowan's Reach with her parents and Cordelia, who by now was referred to by most townsfolk as Old Lady Rowan, despite there being no blood relation. In 1945, news reached Blackfield that Elias II had been killed in action during the final push into Germany. Edward and Lillian were devastated, but witnesses reported that Cordelia seemed almost pleased by the news. According to household staff, whose accounts were only shared decades later after they had left the Rowans' employment, Cordelia was overheard telling Constance, "The line now runs through you alone. The responsibility is yours." Following the war, Edward's health began to decline rapidly. By 1950, he was confined to his bed, suffering from what doctors described as a wasting disease of unknown origin. Lillian devoted herself to his care, while Cordelia took on more responsibilities in running the household. Constance, too, now 27, had developed into a talented artist, though her subjects were exclusively birds, particularly crows, rendered in disturbing detail, often depicted in human-like poses or with human features. It was during this period that Constance too met Richard Hayes, a young doctor who had come to Blackfield to establish a practice after serving as a military physician during the war. Their courtship was brief and, according to local gossip, not entirely approved of by Cordelia. Nevertheless, they married in a small ceremony in 1951. The wedding was held at Rowan's Reach rather than the town church, with only family and a few close friends in attendance. Within a year of their marriage, Constance too gave birth to twin girls named Eleanor and Cordelia. The birth was not attended by a hospital physician but was instead overseen by Cordelia herself, with Richard present in his capacity as a doctor. The twins were rarely seen in town, as Constance too became increasingly reclusive after their birth. In February 1953, Edward Rowan finally succumbed to his illness. His funeral was sparsely attended, as many of his business associates had either died or moved away and the family had maintained their distance from the community. Lillian, who had exhausted herself caring for her husband, fell ill shortly after the funeral and died within weeks. The official cause was listed as pneumonia, though some suspected a broken heart. With Edward and Lillian gone, ownership of Rowan's Reach passed to Constance too and, by extension, Richard Hayes. This marked the first time in the estate's history that the Rowan name was not directly attached to its master. According to legal documents filed at the time, Richard began making inquiries about selling the property and the now struggling textile business, which had failed to modernize after the war. This brings us to the central mystery of our story. On the morning of July 7, 1953, a fire broke out in the east wing of Rowan's Reach, where the nursery was located. By the time the Blackfield Volunteer Fire Department arrived, the wing was engulfed in flames. After the fire was extinguished, a grim search began for victims. The remains of Richard Hayes were found in the hallway outside the nursery, apparently having tried to reach the twins. Constance too's body was discovered in the master bedroom, though forensic evidence suggested she had died before the fire started. A deep cut across her throat indicated she had been murdered. Of Cordelia and the twin girls, no remains were ever found. The official investigation concluded that Cordelia had killed Constance too, set the fire, and fled with the twins. A manhunt was launched, but no trace of the elderly woman or the children was ever discovered. The case officially remains open in the Blackfield Police Department's files, though it hasn't been actively investigated in decades. But this is where the official record ends and the legend of the Rowans truly begins to take shape. In the aftermath of the tragedy, as Rowan's Reach stood partially burned and completely abandoned, strange stories began to circulate through Blackfield. Some claimed to see lights moving in the undamaged portions of the house late at night. Others reported hearing the cries of children coming from the woods surrounding the estate. The most persistent stories, however, involved crows, massive gatherings of the birds that seemed to follow certain individuals around town, particularly those who spoke publicly about the Rowan case or expressed interest in purchasing the abandoned property. Former Blackfield Police Chief Harold Bennett, who was a junior officer at the time of the fire, shared with me his experiences before passing away in 2018. "We had every available man searching those woods for weeks. There's no way an elderly woman and 2 infants could have vanished so completely. The dogs couldn't pick up a scent, which the handler said was like nothing they'd ever experienced before. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist at the property line." Bennett paused at this point in our interview, looking troubled before continuing. "There was something we found, though, that never made it into the official report. In the center of those woods, there was a clearing with a circle of stones, just like the one reported back in the 1890s. In the middle was a shallow pit with feathers, but not animal bones this time. They were human. Infant-sized. The captain ordered us to fill it in and never speak of it. Said it would cause a panic. Throughout the late 1950s and into the 1960s, several attempts were made to purchase and restore or demolish Rowan's Reach. None were successful. Construction crews reported equipment failures, unexplained accidents, and workers refusing to return to the site after experiencing what they described as a feeling of being watched or hearing whispers that weren't quite human. In 1968, a developer from Boston finally managed to purchase the property at a fraction of its value. His plan was to demolish the house and build a modern subdivision. On the day demolition was scheduled to begin, the project foreman arrived to find every piece of equipment covered in crows. Hundreds of them, sitting silently, watching. When the birds were scared away and work commenced, the wrecking ball operator suffered a sudden heart attack. His replacement refused to continue after claiming to see a woman in old-fashioned clothes standing in an upstairs window of the house they were about to demolish. The developer eventually abandoned the project, citing environmental concerns and structural issues that made development impractical. The property reverted to the county due to unpaid taxes. Throughout the 1970s, Rowan's reach became a magnet for thrill-seekers and paranormal enthusiasts. Many reported disturbing experiences, watches stopping at precisely 3:33 a.m., cameras malfunctioning, and the overwhelming sense of being followed after leaving the property. Several visitors were later involved in unusual accidents, often involving incidents where they were attacked by birds in seemingly coordinated assaults. In 1975, a group of graduate students from Miskatonic University's anthropology department conducted an unauthorized overnight stay at the estate as part of a study on local legends. Only 3 of the 5 students returned. The missing 2 were never found despite extensive searches. The survivors refused to discuss what happened, and one later committed suicide, leaving behind a note that read, "They're watching through the crow's eyes. They've always been watching." By the 1980s, local authorities had fenced off the property and posted no trespassing signs, though this did little to deter the curious. The partially burned mansion had deteriorated significantly, with the roof collapsing in several areas and nature reclaiming much of the structure. Yet, strangely, the central tower remained intact, seeming to defy the ravages of time and weather. In 1983, on the 30th anniversary of the fire, the Blackfield Gazette ran a feature story on the Rowan mystery. The reporter, Jessica Winters, had spent months researching the family history and interviewing anyone with connections to the case. Her article suggested that the Rowans had been involved in an ancient cult with roots in pre-Christian Europe and that the disappearances and deaths associated with the family were part of a multi-generational ritual culminating in the 1953 incident. Winters cited anonymous sources claiming that both Constance and Cordelia Rowan had been practitioners of a form of witchcraft focused on transformation and rebirth through avian vessels, essentially the transfer of human consciousness into birds, particularly crows. The article was dismissed by most as sensationalism, but it rekindled interest in the case and led to a brief reopening of the investigation, which yielded no new findings. 2 weeks after the article was published, Jessica Winters was involved in a car accident when, according to witnesses, a sudden swarm of birds flew directly at her windshield, causing her to lose control and drive off a bridge. Her body was never recovered from the river below. Throughout the 1990s, the legend of the Rowans continued to evolve. Urban explorers who ventured onto the property reported finding strange symbols carved into trees and stones, concentric circles with what appeared to be a stylized bird at the center. Several claimed to have found old photographs or documents in the decaying mansion, but curiously, none of these items ever seemed to leave the property. Anyone who claimed to have taken such evidence would later discover their pockets or bags empty. In 1997, a Hollywood production company announced plans to make a film based on the Rowan case. Pre-production began with scouts visiting Blackfield to photograph the estate and surrounding areas. Within months, the project was quietly cancelled. No official explanation was given, but industry insiders reported that several key members of the production team had quit after experiencing disturbing dreams featuring twin girls with eyes like black marbles who spoke in unison. As we entered the new millennium, interest in the Rowan case waned somewhat, becoming just another regional ghost story, albeit one with unusually persistent and consistent details across decades of tellings. The estate continued to crumble, though, as mentioned earlier, the central tower remained oddly well preserved. In 2008, a significant discovery was made when the Blackfield Historical Society was cataloguing documents donated by the family of a former mill worker. Among ledgers and pay stubs was a journal belonging to Edmund Rowan, apparently hidden by the worker who had found it shortly before Edmund's disappearance in 1935. The journal was written in a cipher that took historians months to decode, and even then much of it remained unintelligible. The passages that were decoded painted a disturbing picture. Edmund wrote of the covenant made by Elias with those who watch from above and a promise that the seventh generation shall complete the transformation. He referred repeatedly to something called the Black Pinnacle, which scholars believe was his name for the ritual his family had been working toward for decades. Most disturbingly, Edmund wrote, "Cordelia is not what she appears. She has been with us much longer than anyone knows. I have seen her change her face as easily as one might change a mask. She is the keeper of the knowledge, guiding each generation toward our ultimate purpose." The journal also contained detailed drawings of anatomical studies comparing human and avian structures, with notations about points of spiritual transference and vessels of consciousness. The final dated entry, from just days before Edmund's reported disappearance, read, "I cannot complete my transformation yet. The bloodline must continue to the seventh, but I have seen what awaits us, and it is glorious. Until then, I will watch and wait with the others." In 2015, the county finally approved the demolition of Rowan's Reach, citing public safety concerns. The night before work was to begin, a severe storm hit Blackfield, with lightning striking the central tower multiple times. By morning, the entire structure had collapsed in on itself, leaving little more than a pile of rubble for the demolition crew to clear away. During the cleanup process, workers discovered a sealed room in what had been the cellar beneath the tower. Inside was a collection of unusual artifacts, bird cages of various sizes, including some large enough to hold a human, books in languages that linguists have struggled to identify, and, most unsettlingly, a set of child-sized clothes laid out as if waiting for their owners to return, clothing that, based on the style, would have belonged to young girls in the early 1950s. Also found in this room was a large circular mirror with a frame carved to resemble intertwined crows. The glass was unusually dark, and several workers reported feeling dizzy or experiencing momentary hallucinations when looking into it. The mirror was sent to a university laboratory for analysis, but it was apparently lost in transit. The delivery truck was found abandoned on a rural road, its driver missing, and the cargo area empty except for crow feathers scattered across the floor. This brings us to more recent developments. In 2018, a woman named Clara Bennett came forward claiming to be a distant relative of the Rowans through a previously unknown branch of the family. She petitioned the court for ownership of the property, presenting documentation that genealogists confirmed appeared authentic, if unusually well preserved for their age. Clara was described by those who met her as strikingly beautiful but unsettling, with one county clerk noting that her eyes seemed wrong somehow, too dark and too knowing. Her petition was granted, and she announced plans to build a memorial garden on the site to honor her family's history. Construction began in early 2019 but was soon halted when workers uncovered what appeared to be human remains while excavating for the garden's foundation. Forensic analysis determined the bones belonged to at least 12 individuals, most of them female, with deaths dating back to the early 1900s, corresponding with the disappearances that historian Margaret Simmons had previously linked to the Rowan estate. The discovery prompted a criminal investigation, during which Clara Bennett disappeared. Authorities searching her temporary residence found it completely empty not just of her belongings, but of any evidence that anyone had lived there at all. The lease had been paid in cash, and the identification she had used to establish her identity was determined to be expertly forged. More disturbingly, security camera footage from nearby businesses showed Bennett leaving her home on the night of her disappearance, but in every frame, her face was obscured by what appeared to be a technical glitch, a dark smudge that technicians could not explain or remove during enhancement attempts. Today, the former site of Rowan's Reach is cordoned off as an active crime scene, though locals report that police activity has dwindled in recent months. The investigation appears to have stalled, with no new leads on Clara Bennett's whereabouts or the identities of most of the recovered remains. What continues unabated, however, is the presence of crows. Blackfield now hosts one of the largest crow populations in New England, with the birds seeming to concentrate particularly around the former Rowan property and following certain individuals around town, especially those connected to the investigation or who speak publicly about the case. Local ornithologist Dr. James Ferris has been studying this phenomenon for the past 3 years. These aren't normal migratory or feeding patterns, he explained during our interview. These birds appear to be organized in a way that defies our understanding of corvid behavior. They seem to communicate with purpose and demonstrate what I can only describe as targeted surveillance of specific humans. Dr. Ferris showed me footage he had captured of the crows gathering in the shape of what appeared to be 2 small human figures when viewed from above, a formation they maintained for nearly 20 minutes before dispersing. "I'm a scientist," he said, "and I deal in observable facts. What I've observed here defies rational explanation within our current understanding of animal behavior." Perhaps most chilling are the reports that began emerging in 2020 of twin girls seen at the edges of the woods surrounding the former estate. Always described as around 5 or 6 years old, wearing old-fashioned dresses, with unusually dark eyes and often accompanied by crows. They never speak to witnesses but are said to watch intently before retreating into the trees when approached. These sightings have been dismissed by authorities as urban legend and the power of suggestion, but their consistency across unrelated witnesses is noteworthy. Child psychologist Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who interviewed several of the witnesses, told me, "These aren't people who knew each other or had shared their stories before reporting their experiences. Yet, they all described the same details: the girls' matching appearance, their stillness, the way they seem to communicate without speaking, and most notably, the way the crows seem to respond to their presence, forming a protective circle around them." The last official statement from the Blackfield Police Department regarding the Rowan case came in early 2023, when Chief Michael Donovan told reporters, "While we continue to investigate the human remains found on the property, we have no evidence connecting these findings to the events of 1953 or the recent disappearance of Clara Bennett. We ask the public to respect the ongoing investigation and remind everyone that trespassing on the property remains prohibited." Unofficially, however, officers seem reluctant to patrol the area, particularly after dark. One officer, speaking on condition of anonymity, shared, "We draw straws for that assignment. Nobody wants it. You feel watched the entire time, and the radio never works properly near that property, just static and what sounds like children's voices whispering just below the threshold of understanding." So, what are we to make of the macabre history of the Rowan family? Is it merely a tragic series of events that has grown into local legend through decades of retelling? Or is there something more sinister at work, a multi-generational plan that reached its culmination in 1953 but continues to echo into the present? The facts we know for certain are these. The Rowan family arrived in Blackfield in 1887 and established themselves as influential but isolated members of the community. Over decades, they were associated with unusual practices, unexplained disappearances, and deaths under suspicious circumstances. In 1953, a fire destroyed part of their estate. Constance Rowan Hayes was murdered, her husband Richard died in the fire, and Cordelia Rowan vanished along with twin girls Eleanor and Cordelia Hayes, who would be in their early 70s today, if still alive. No trace of Cordelia or the twins was ever found despite extensive searches. Human remains discovered on the property in 2019 suggest a pattern of killings associated with the estate going back to the early 1900s. Clara Bennett, claiming to be a Rowan descendant, disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 2019, and sightings of twin girls who never age continue to this day. What we cannot explain through conventional means is the persistent connection to crows, the seemingly impossible preservation of the central tower until its sudden destruction, the missing journal pages that Edmund Rowan claimed detailed a transformation, and the unnaturally consistent patterns of strange occurrences over more than a century. If we are to believe Edmund's decoded writings, the Rowans were working towards something called the Black Pinnacle, a ritual meant to be completed by the 7th generation. By traditional counting, the twin girls born in 1952 would represent the 4th generation of Rowans in Blackfield: Elias, Edward, Constance the twins. However, if we consider Cordelia as having been with them much longer than anyone knows, as Edmund suggested, the generational count becomes unclear. As I conclude this investigation, I find myself reflecting on something Dr. Ferris said during our interview. In mythology across cultures, crows and ravens are often seen as messengers between worlds, psychopomps guiding souls to the afterlife. But what if that relationship works both ways? What if they can also bring something back? Perhaps the most disturbing possibility is not that the Rowan twins vanished without a trace in 1953, but that they never left at all, that they remain in Blackfield, unchanged by time, watching through the eyes of crows and occasionally appearing at the edge of the woods as a reminder that some family legacies never truly end. For those in Blackfield and the surrounding area, the advice from locals is consistent: don't speak the Rowan name too loudly or too often. Don't linger near the former estate, especially at dusk when the crows gather. And if you see twin girls watching you from the tree line, do not approach them. Turn and walk away, and don't look back until you're well clear of their sight. The final word on this story perhaps belongs to Margaret Simmons, the historian who devoted much of her life to uncovering the truth about the Rowans. When I asked her if she believed the various supernatural elements of the legend, she replied, "I deal in documented facts, and the facts tell me that generations of a single family were involved in something they believed would transform them. Whether their beliefs had any basis in reality is beyond my expertise to say." She paused then, looking out her window at a group of crows gathered on her lawn, birds she claimed had been following her since she began her research decades ago. "But I will tell you this," she continued. "I've spent 60 years studying this case, and I've never once seen a photograph of Cordelia Rowan where her eyes weren't somehow obscured by shadow, by the angle of the camera, by what appears to be deliberate tampering with the image. And in all that time, I've never seen those twin girls, though many others have. I've often wondered if that's because they're waiting for me to finish telling their story. And I wonder what will happen when I do." 2 weeks after our interview, Margaret Simmons died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 94. According to her caregiver, the morning of her death, the crows that had been a constant presence around her home for years were gone. They haven't returned since. As for the Rowan property, it remains abandoned, the crime scene tape faded by sun and rain. The investigation is technically ongoing but effectively cold. The human remains found there have been interred in the Blackfield cemetery under markers reading simply unknown. And still, people report seeing twin girls at the edge of the woods, their dark eyes watching, waiting. No one has approached them. No one has heard them speak. And overhead, the crows continue to gather, their calls sometimes sounding almost like whispered words: "Come back to us. Come back home." Perhaps the true horror of the Rowan family isn't what happened to them, but what they might have become. And if Edmund's journal is to be believed, the transformation they sought wasn't an end, but a beginning, one that continues to unfold in the shadows of Blackfield to this day. For the ghastly journal, this has been the story of the Rowan family. Sleep well tonight. And if you hear tapping at your window, it's probably just the wind. Probably. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe for more historical mysteries and unexplained phenomena. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the Rowan case, but perhaps think twice before saying their name too many times. After all, the crows are always listening. Until next time, remember, some histories are better left undisturbed.